Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Tertulia. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Matthew Hayes. I'm a sociology professor at St. Thomas University in Canada, research chair in global and international studies. Tonight's Tertulia is organized by a group of people at UNB and St. Thomas, including Tracy Glynn, Christy Lane, and Daniel Tubb. Tonight, Patty Rao is also hosting tonight, and of course Megan Hill, who's also helping to organize tonight's event. Tonight's Tertulia organizers are on unceded Wolastoqey territory, and we'd invite you to consider how the occupation of this territory over the last 250 years has helped shape unequal access to resources and space. Tonight's event is sponsored by the NB Media Co-op, Raven Rural Action and Voices for the Environment, the Atlantic Regional Solidarity Network, and book publishers Fernwood, Between the Lines, Verso, and the Canadian Scholars Women's Press. Without further ado, tonight's Tertulia is being hosted by Adi Rao, who will introduce the speakers, and I will turn it over to him.
Thank you. So we're good. Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be asked to introduce our speakers and moderate this conversation tonight. My name is Aditya Rao. I'm a human rights lawyer and work in the labor movement here in New Brunswick. I'm especially excited about the topic tonight because social justice in our cities has been top of mind for many of us lately. I am, along with Tracy, Christy, Matthew, Tobin, and others on and off this call, a member of the New Brunswick Coalition for Tenants' Rights. We just released a municipal platform for what cities can do to protect tenants and further the right to adequate housing. We did this because cities in New Brunswick claim they can't do anything about housing. In fact, here in Fredericktown alone, our mayor has said that homelessness is not a municipal issue. Our city council hemmed and hawed before granting, under many conditions, $900,000 to an affordable housing project. And just days later, they voted to deny a simple zoning amendment for an expansion of a drop-in center that would have provided supportive housing to homeless members of our community. Well, we think they're wrong, and so do about a couple dozen other cities in the country mentioned in our municipal platform. So it's actually especially great to see so many city council candidates who are on the call right now with us. We're also part of a local activist network called Solidarity Fredericton, which has been looking at police spending in cities. In Fredericton, the city spends over 1/5 of its budget on policing alone and almost no money until recently on housing. Our municipal police forces routinely stop and ask people for identification for no reason. And it'll come as no surprise to you that this practice, known as carding, has been shown to disproportionately target Indigenous and Black people in New Brunswick and across the country. Our municipal services also not infrequently share personal information with law enforcement. Sometimes this means sharing information about someone's immigration status when they're interacting with municipal police forces, or even when they're just trying to access emergency shelter or food banks. We know that this has resulted in the deportation and forced separation of families across this country. We're also just days away from a municipal election taking place across the province, or at least in most of the province. Some of our friends in some other parts of the province are of course not voting till May 25th. But this month, we will be electing municipal leaders who will determine whether and to what extent social justice will be a priority in their cities and municipalities. We're also on the cusp of a major municipal reform in New Brunswick, the Local Governance Reform Project. It points out that in New Brunswick, there are 104 local governments, 8 cities, 26 towns, 61 villages, 1 regional municipality, 8 rural communities, and 236 local service districts. The government wants to radically restructure and reform what municipalities look like in our province, and just today they announced public consultations on this subject. So tonight's conversation is incredibly timely and could not be more relevant to our current context. I'll introduce our speakers one at a time before I invite them each to give their presentation. Valerya Edelman, who is going to be speaking on the topic, Dear City, Stop Hurting Us. Valerya is a social worker and community activist who helped develop Clinic 554 and the peer worker programs at Riverstone Recovery Center in Fredericton. Her MA thesis from University of Victoria is There Goes the Neighbourhood, a case study of social mix in Vancouver's downtown Eastside. She will speak on New Brunswick's urban addictions problem and how public policies continue to demonize, infantilize, and exclude people who might otherwise find a place in the city. Over to you, Valerya.
Thanks, Addie. Thanks all the Tertulias too for setting this up. People use, misuse, and have addictions to drugs to meet the kinds of needs we all can relate to. Addiction is an understandable human response. However, public policies continue to support the demonization, infantilization, and exclusion of people who have addictions to drugs. In my talk, I will discuss the roots of addiction and suggest a shift in public policy towards an approach grounded in compassion, respect, and a recognition of the need for connections. So here's a definition of addiction by Dr. Gabor Mate, who is an expert in treating addiction. An addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure and relief in, therefore craves, and they suffer negative consequences in the long term, and they can't give it up or refuse to give it up despite the negative consequences. We know that people can be addicted to all kinds of things, from food to shopping to sex to gambling. For the sake of my talk, I'm going to focus on drugs or substances, such as opiates, amphetamines, benzodiazepines, stimulants, alcohol. So when I'm talking about addiction, I'm talking about the inability to stop craving and seeking a substance despite the negative consequences. So what do you think the roots of addiction are? We see the roots are in trauma, lack of attachment, lack of connection during childhood, infancy, and even before. The conditions for disconnections in our modern world is painfully significant. And the experiences an infant or child has does not have to be severe to cause wounds and not need to come from deliberate actions. Infants and children, they can't comprehend context. They just instinctively know that they need connection to survive. And so their need for connection can be greater than the need for food. When they don't get that connection, a few things happen. One, the little human adapt their behavior to get that connection. Two, the pathways to the fight or flight mode, they strengthen. And three, the pathways for endorphins are underdeveloped. And endorphins, they relieve pain, stress, and allow a sense of well-being. So experiences of trauma and disconnection in our early years narrow the pathways for endorphins to travel, making getting that sense of well-being in adulthood harder. So for many people, when they use a substance like opiate, which floods our nervous system with endorphins, they feel that sense of well-being for the first time. Many who use opiates regularly say that it makes them feel normal, not even high, just normal. Benzos help alleviate the fight or flight mode that people are continuously living in. Stimulants give people energy, help people focus. All the street drugs serve a purpose. They meet needs for well-being and the need to function. Now, I'm not saying that drugs are good and we all should go out and do tons of drugs. Street drugs have significant side effects. Like all those endorphin and dopamine pathways become even weaker when we take substances, leading to a dependence, like feeling sick when we don't have those substances, which could lead to more cravings and more substance use despite negative consequences. So it begins with feeling a lack of connection, finding something that makes you feel good, feel right, possibly for the first time, and then craving to continue to feel good. We can all relate to wanting to feel a sense of well-being, right? We can have compassion for folks who are seeking something we all want and need, who may have a harder time getting that sense of well-being another way. We can have compassion for people who are desperately seeking to solve their suffering. It doesn't sound criminal or immoral to crave and pursue endorphins and dopamine that unfortunately weren't developed on their own. That's it. So why do we criminalize substance use? Demonize people who use substances? Take a population that did not have enough connections and further disconnect them from our society, worsening their sense of connection and well-being, surveying their behavior, ramping up fight or fight mode, and locking them up in a cell for trying to get substances or using substances. It makes no sense, right? It makes no sense because our laws around substances were not created to improve individual or population health. They were not created to make a safer society. Narcotic laws have a racist and capitalist roots. Now, I want to focus today on our current environment, so I'll not digress into the history of narcotic laws, But if anyone wants to look deeper into the history, you can read the works of Susan C. Boyd, Elizabeth Comack, Donald McPherson. The laws greatly influence how we view people who use substances, and we can question some of our taken for granted views around substance use and the people who use substances. The laws affect the most stigmatized, marginalized people, not corporate guys buying an 8-ball of cocaine, not folks going for happy hour on the patio. The people who are demonized are poor, people of color, Indigenous, women with children, and Indigenous women with children are treated most unfairly, I would say. The war on drugs is a war on people, marginalized people who are desperately seeking the feeling of well-being and the ability to function that we all want and need. So this is our context. People who are marginalized based on race, gender, and socioeconomic status, who are seeking to solve a problem that came from trauma and disconnection, totally not their fault, acting on very human needs, are stigmatized, demonized, and criminalized with outdated racist capitalist laws. So how do we see this manifest in our city of Fredericton? I'll give you 2 examples. The first, kindness meters, and the second, Phoenix Center. So let's talk about our kindness meters in downtown Fredericton. Are you familiar with these? They look like parking meters, but they're painted bright green. And they encourage people to put money into the meter instead of giving money directly to people on the street panhandling. The meters say that the money will go to places like the Fredericton Community Kitchen and other services that panhandlers are welcome to use. These meters are an example of how public policy infantilize and exclude people in our community who do not have a high socioeconomic status and who may be using street drugs. So, you know, no one tells me how to spend my money, except maybe Canada Revenue Agency. But if I want to buy a bag of chips and have a bottle of wine for supper, which I have done, maybe more than once, I can do that. And if someone was trying to stop me by saying, oh, you shouldn't eat those, or, you know, those really aren't good for you, and if you can't make that decision for yourself, we'll make it for you, I wouldn't think they're being kind. I would think they're being rude. And I would think, get out of my way, please, because I want that bag of chips. But the city isn't looking at me. And they're not looking about what I'm buying. The city with these kindness meters are trying to control what panhandlers are buying. And this is unnecessarily controlling. It sends a message that people who panhandle are not welcome downtown, that they're not trusted to make decisions for themselves, and that perhaps the city values the best interest of the shopper over someone who panhandles. These kindness meters further divide groups and worsen the problem of disconnection that people who use drugs are likely experiencing. Disconnection will not stop people from doing drugs. Disconnection is never the solution. So back when these meters were installed, a few of us asked a city councillor if panhandlers were invited to any meetings which discussed kindness meters. And we were told that not one person who panhandles was consulted about the meters. And it sounds like the city council didn't even try to invite them. We said, offer bus tickets, sandwiches, childcare, flexibility, and people will come. The meters have been operating for years. Have they reviewed with panhandlers the level of kindness they experience? Perhaps, I don't think so. So dear City Council, the future City Council, then one, please value the needs of all community members equally. Don't value the needs of people with money over the people without. 2, don't endorse actions that push some members of the community out. Don't assume that, sorry, I got distracted by the chat thing. Don't assume that people who use drugs are not capable of meaningfully participating in creating solutions to problems. Please don't send the message that people must work towards stopping to use drugs in order for them to be included in community. That is just inhumane. 4, encourage connections in the community between business owners and panhandlers. So here are a few ideas that can build connections in a more inclusive neighborhood. So the first is a photo calendar project. So cameras would be provided to community members who may be using drugs, who may be panhandling downtown. The photos can be developed and printed and displayed by downtown Fredericton small businesses like Harvey's and Gallery on Queen. Calendars can be created from selected photos and feature advertisements of other local businesses. The participants in the photo project can sell the calendars to shoppers and earn a few more dollars in their pockets. Other initiatives which have been successful in mixed income neighborhoods include encouraging sliding scale menus or creating a few low-cost items on a menu. So people who are living on the streets in their neighborhood can come in and sit down for a meal. There's also paid forward coffee options. So people who are going into a nice cafe can have the option to buy a coffee for someone else who can't otherwise afford it. Affordable menu options and paid forward options have been proven to be successful in creating a sense of community in other mixed income neighborhoods. So these are just some ideas to illustrate that there are ideas out there. The first step is to include the voices of the people who are sitting and sleeping on the streets. So the second example of how people who are marginalized based on race, gender, socioeconomic status, who are seeking to solve a problem that came from trauma and disconnection with the use of substances, but are stigmatized, demonized, and criminalized with outdated racist capitalist viewpoints, is the tragic closure of Phoenix Learning Center. That was on Woodstock Road. So the Phoenix was a drop-in center with low barriers. One of the only places where folks with mental illness, folks under the influence of substances could go and hang out and not be told to move along. With COVID restrictions at the public library, the mall, AIDS New Brunswick, the downtown community health center, churches, people had nowhere to go. So Phoenix is really important. The Phoenix also saw a future with social enterprises and even permanent supportive housing upstairs. But the voices from residents in Sunshine Gardens said, not in my backyard, NIMBY. So I didn't read every letter from Sunshine Gardens, but the couple that I read complained about guests of Phoenix peeing outside, using drugs outside, discarded needles or potentially discarded needles, I wasn't sure, and being approached by individuals who they don't know and trust in a park. So this fear of imagined scenarios between two groups of people who are so disconnected.
Valerya, 5-minute warning for you.
Yep. When we design solutions to change NIMBY to YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, we need to invite people who use drugs to the design table so we can create effective solutions. We need to keep in mind that a meeting could be intimidating for someone who continuously gets messages that they don't belong. So some strategies include, don't just invite one person to represent the entire community. That is way too much pressure. Consider alternative meeting places than City Hall, where it could be intimidating. Share food, provide bus tickets. City Council could reach out to organizations like AIDS New Brunswick, who I believe would have useful insights into how to create meetings between city councilors and people who use drugs. In other cities, solutions to problems such as peeing outside were created with a network of drug users. Public washrooms were built with input from the folks who would use them the most. Lights were placed in sensible areas, and the washrooms were monitored by the members of the drug users group. The lack of public washrooms in Fredericton needs to be addressed by the city. We hear complaints by businesses and residents over and over again about peeing and pooing outside. But come on, people, build more washrooms. It's on their preference to go outside. Sometimes it's their only option. So I urge the city to build more washrooms and work with the folks who will be using them. A solution for discarded needles could be more sharps containers or a program like Spikes on Bikes, where people go on bicycles and pick up needles. That's been a partnership in other cities between health authorities and nonprofit societies. So wherever Phoenix ends up landing, Fredericton can reach out to AIDS New Brunswick, Horizon Health, Public Health, and create solutions that build community, safety, and inclusion. The Phoenix Learning Center also had potential for social enterprises, such as making and selling crafts, salves, and soaps, a painting business, a cleaning business, a bike mechanic shop, and hopefully the potential is not lost. The city can support social enterprises and incentivize local businesses to support them. Social enterprises put a few extra dollars in people's pockets and promote connections, sense of belonging that we as all human beings need. So municipal elections are coming up and there are many candidates who hold social justice values. My fingers are crossed that they get elected and we see a turn away from demonizing drug use and people who use drugs, and an end to the message that people who use drugs will be excluded from our society until they stop using drugs. We need to include people who use drugs now, not wait until they stop, because some people never will, and we need to see the humanity in that. We need to create doable, affordable policies that are humane. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valerya. What a powerful presentation, and what an important call to action, a timely one as we head towards the polls in the coming few days. This has been a divisive, certainly, conversation in our community here in Fredericton, and it's been really sad to see the way that it all played out. Like you, I also hope that the demonization of folks who are, at the end of the day, members of our community ends now.
This panel, Social Justice and the City of New Brunswick, held on May 5th, 2021, was organized by Tertulias Fredericton as part of the city's edition and was supported by the Canada Research Chair in Global and International Studies and the MB Media Co-op.